Well, I can definitely not complain about this documentary being almost 4 hours long. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Movie Emporium's HBO original documentary review of Mel Brooks, the 99-year-old man. This is directed, of course, by Judd Apatow. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Mel Brooks, the 99-year-old man, is, of course, a documentary about the life and times of Mel Brooks, told through the eyes of many of his friends, many of his comedian friends, as well as just many people who were inspired by him. And it basically is an exhaustive, almost 4 hour, probably close to 4 hour documentary, similar to like the Larry Sanders documentary about who Mel Brooks was, what it was like to grow up with him, what it was like to have, be, a father and a son and a daughter, and what it's like for the kind of inspiration of what Mel Brooks did for comedy and kind of how he was the life of the party in a lot of respects. It shows his marriage to Anne Bancroft, his kids. It shows the movies that he made, the popularity that he gained, and the nature of like he always seemed to be on when he was talented or when he was going through the system. But it also shows that he also went through a lot of trials and tribulations of being very poor and also dealing with the situation of him being very popular in a lot of respects. From the producers all the way up to Dracula Dead and loving it, as well as the Tony Award-winning producers musical. And that's in essence what it is. It's 2 parts. Each one's about an hour and 40 minutes long, and it interviews pretty much everyone you can think of who has either worked with Mel Brooks or was a lifelong friend of Mel Brooks in general. So there you go. So Mel Brooks, to me personally, is one of the greatest comedian directors of all time. I think Spaceballs and Blazing Saddles are 2 of the funniest movies of all time. I'm a little hit or miss when it comes to like Young Frankenstein as the producers, but I get their popularity. I understand why they're so beloved. I mean, working with Gene Wilder and working with all these famous people like Dom DeLuise and just anyone you could think of, and being friends with the great Carl Reiner, who just recently passed away, as well as his son Rob Reiner, who's in this documentary, which is interesting. This is just basically Judd Apatow doing similar to what he did with Larry Sanders, where he is basically immortalizing, kind of going through what makes Mel Brooks tick, or at least attempting what makes Mel Brooks tick. So I was looking forward to this. Mel Brooks is very funny, very humorous. I learned, there's a lot of stuff in this documentary. And so the question remains, the issues I have with documentaries usually is they're way too short and they basically don't do anything new. And so for my honest opinion of this documentary, as much as I complain about documentaries not really doing what I think they should do, which is really go deep and kind of go beyond the level surface of the person they're documentary about, I think this is a pretty exhaustive documentary. It goes into kind of who Mel Brooks was growing up. It talks about his kids, talks about his family, talks about why he became popular. But like a lot of documentaries, there is a lot of surface level stuff here when it comes to who Mel Brooks was that we already know about. And so as long as this movie is, or this documentary is, and as entertaining and thought-provoking as it becomes, it still lands in the kind of issues that I have with documentaries that I want to see more. I want to see what makes Mel Brooks tick. We know he's very funny. We know he's humorous. We know he was impassioned with his wife, Anne Bancroft. And, there is some level stuff here where he was a very complex individual when he failed and stuff like that. But I don't think it goes deep enough, to be fairly honest. I don't think it goes hard enough in this documentary. It's just more of a love letter to who Mel Brooks was. And maybe that's fine for people, but I feel like it could, it's more of just kind of a feel-good piece than it is about really kind of the machinations of Mel Brooks and what he did. And like I said, he was definitely a trailblazer when it came to what he was doing. But if kind of like the machinations of like how Blazing Saddles was very controversial and how Young Frankenstein was difficult to get together, I think that there is just not a lot here, to be fairly honest, that we didn't already know. Some of the stuff you may not know about him, like producing, of course, Elephant Man and of course The Fly, which are outside the realm of like you would ever think he would direct or produce. And he was very, very particular about, not keeping his name on there so that the director wasn't like overshadowed by how big Mel Brooks was. But the other thing is, because Mel Brooks is almost 100 years old, it's very difficult to really get a lot of surface material, a lot below the surface material of who he is, because, you see a lot of like Johnny Carson stuff, and you see a lot of like footage of him on talk shows and being very funny, and you hear a lot of like the people who worked with him and the actors and the people who were inspired by him. And it's not a bad documentary. This isn't the Beach Boys or the 6,000 Disney Beatles documentary that they've come out with. It's a documentary that just kind of shows that Mel Brooks was really talented at what he did, creating stuff from Get Smart to the 2,000-Year-Old Man to, you know, everything in that realm, the movies that he created and just kind of how he made people laugh. And maybe that's all you need. But sometimes I think Judd Apatow tries to keep it as easygoing and puff piece as you can get, and maybe that's what people want. I don't know, but I kind of want more out of it. I guess I just feel differently about documentaries in general. Is why I always gravitate towards like the Ken Burns stuff, because it's really, really hard hitting stuff, and it really goes deep into like the subject matter they're talking about. But I mean, I gotta admit, 4 hours is a lot of stuff to talk about for Mel Brooks, and he is still going at 99 years old, and you know, almost 100 years old, and you know, he's just did a stuff with the Spaceballs 2 movie that's coming out, which I think is unneeded. But I think overall, and just to kind of end the review here, I think it's a fun documentary. It really does show Mel Brooks and like his ability to kind of push the boundaries. And we do see stuff, I honestly didn't know he was in a war. I really didn't, which is kind of interesting. But putting his kind of who he was and the nature of what he was, and seeing him with Anne Bancroft and stuff like that, and seeing Max Brooks and his other kids. I think only one of his other kids was in this, and his granddaughter and stuff like that. It is, once again, the one thing that is interesting is once again Rob Reiner, who literally just passed away like a month after this documentary comes out, is in this, and he talks about losing his father and how Mel Brooks was there when he lost his father. And it's weird to watch because of course Rob Reiner was unfortunately killed dramatically and unfortunate. But yeah, I mean that is the documentary of Mel Brooks, the 99-year-old man. You're gonna get a lot of surface level stuff, a lot of people praising who he is, which is not that is not needed. But we know who Mel Brooks is, and if you don't know much about him, you'll learn a lot here. But I think it's just, I don't know. I feel like I need more. Sometimes these documentaries just, they're not willing to push the boundaries, and they're just kind of, celebration instead of going deeper, which I think documentaries need to do. So that's my own personal opinion, but that is what it is. So that's my take on the Mel Brooks documentary, The 99-Year-Old Man, which will be released in 2 parts over 2 nights on, I think, HBO Max, if I remember right. And yeah, so there you go. Anyways, with that said, that is my take. I do appreciate you watching. Comments below. What is your favorite Mel Brooks moment? What is your favorite Mel Brooks gag, joke, movie, thing he ever did? Like I said, Blazing Saddles, 2,000-Year-Old Man. He's, he's renowned for a reason. So anyways, comments below. Otherwise, if you like what you see on the channel, hit the subscribe button to join Movie Emporium. Hit that notification bell at top to find what's coming in next. If you like the video, awesome. Hit that like button. And as always, we'll see you guys on the next video. Peace out, guys.